At a fundamental level, human biology contains a strict structural limit. Our capacity to experience physical sensation is finite. When we imagine paradise, we tend to project our worldly desires into infinity. We envision a state of perpetual sensory gratification, an endless extension of the things that make us feel good now. But physical pleasure relies on the resolution of a biological need. To experience it forever without a break or a body that tires contradicts the actual mechanics required to feel it in the first place. If an eternal reward exists, it must operate through a different system, one that does not rely on the diminishing returns of a sensory body. In the 11th century, the Persian philosopher Naser Khosrow analyzed the system in his text Khwan al-Akhwan. He treats the human drive for pleasure not just as a moral question, but as a logical one. Khosrow's thesis is that true eternal reward exists as an epistemological state. It is a condition defined by the constant acquisition of knowledge. He distinguishes between two modes of experience. Physical pleasure is tethered to organs that decay. Intellectual pleasure belongs to the soul, which he views as a permanent, non-physical vessel for understanding. This text functions as an architectural map of consciousness, seeking to prove that the soul's capacity for growth is the only part of the human experience capable of sustaining infinity. Khosrow begins with a bedrock observation. What we call physical pleasure is actually the temporary relief of a physiological deficiency, like hunger or thirst. This graph tracks Khosrow's case study of the pleasure derived from eating food over time. The first bite of food to resolve a state of starvation creates a sharp upward spike in pleasure. As the stomach fills, the deficiency disappears. The curve flattens. Each subsequent bite provides less gratification. If you continue eating once satiated, the pleasure metric drops below the axis. The sensation turns into harm, sickness, or death. This illustrates a mechanical ceiling. If the physical organ, the stomach or the eye, is destroyed or simply reaches its limit, the capacity for that pleasure vanishes entirely. Any reward system dependent on sensory resolution is fundamentally incapable of maintaining infinite pleasure. To find a reward that doesn't terminate, Khosrow looks to lizzat-e-ilm, the pleasure of knowledge. This second graph tracks the mind's reaction to a new idea. Learning doesn't fill a void in the same way eating does. Instead, it expands the mind's ability to perceive deeper connections. The more a person knows, the more avenues for inquiry they open. This creates a compounding effect, where each discovery heightens the satisfaction found in the next. Khosrow bases this on an Ismaili triad: the knower, the known, and knowledge itself. Because this triad is composed of non-physical elements, the reward loop it generates is not subject to the exhaustion or decay found in biological systems. For Khosrow, intellectual acquisition is the only structural framework that avoids a terminal point of satiation. Khosrow's logical deductions find a poetic echo in the works of Jalal al-Din Rumi, specifically within the Mathnawi. Rumi uses the metaphor of an infant's absolute dependence on milk to describe our current attachment to physical sensation. The infant cannot imagine a world beyond the breast, but eventually it must be weaned to discover the far more substantial nourishment of adult food. This metaphor mirrors Khosrow's logic. The soul is meant to graduate from finite sensory attachments and seek out the infinite food of divine knowledge. If you find these deep dives into classical philosophy valuable, consider liking and subscribing. It helps us continue producing in-depth research on these texts. Rumi provides the intuitive weight for the same structural reality Khosrow mapped through logic. Khosrow's focus on the soul's intellect has clear historical affinities with several traditions in Western philosophy. In ancient Greece, Plato's theory of forms argued the eternal soul achieves its highest state by grasping immutable truths, concepts beyond the reach of physical decay. Centuries later, the utilitarian John Stuart Mill arrived at a similar qualitative distinction when he separated higher intellectual pleasures from lower physical ones. Mill famously claimed that intellectual pleasures have a superior value because they engage the faculties that distinguish humans from animals, a point Khosrow emphasized as the soul's primary purpose. While their cultural contexts differ, these thinkers converge on the same diagnosis. The body is a limited vessel, while the intellect offers a far more resilient platform. Shifting eastward, Khosrow's observation regarding deficiency closely aligns with the classical Buddhist analysis of human condition. Buddhism defines dukkha as a state of unsatisfactoriness caused by craving. It views sensory desire as a loop that can never be permanently filled. Both Khosrow and the Buddhist tradition recognize physical desire is fueled by a sense of lack, making it a fundamentally unstable foundation for lasting happiness. However, their solutions part ways. Where Buddhism targets the total cessation of this craving, Khosrow suggests redirecting that same energy toward an intellectual target that never runs dry. Khosrow's model acknowledges the universal problem of suffering identified by the East, but uses it to argue for an afterlife based on continuous discovery rather than quietude. From Plato's forms to the Buddhist diagnosis of craving, we see a recurring recognition of the physical body's structural limits. Naser Khosrow's unique contribution was to move this discussion into the realm of formal deduction. He argued against a purely physical paradise because it simply doesn't hold up to logic. If consciousness is to endure forever, the reward it receives must be capable of infinite expansion without the threat of satiety or boredom. Khosrow defines paradise as a dynamic state of epistemological discovery. It is an eternal becoming rather than a static arrival. Ultimately, this framework suggests that the architecture of the human intellect is designed for one thing: the infinite pursuit of knowledge.